hoping that uses less resources. We'll find out. So
Mm.
just double checking, I am now recording. Do I have your guys' permission to be on this recording? Please show a thumbs up if you agree. All right, cool. Then we're good to go. So I'd like to thank all of you for being on this session. We do have multiple sessions coming up, and I'm John McCarthy. I am with Advanced Learning Partnerships and also with who also partners with Dell Technology that provides these type of consulting support. And for those of you who don't know who I am, I'm the person who has been doing reviews of some of the different projects like climate science and the kinetic projects. My background is extensively with project-based learning and also with virtual learning, among other things. And so truthfully, it's been a joy to work on this work with you guys, to look at the things that you've been creating for teachers, because the way it's structured, it really gives students better opportunities to what I call have agency and voice in their learning, which is so important. And so I looked at this opportunity to look at what was already there that was good, and just always the question is, how can we make it better? So please know, when you saw the documents where you see I have extensive comments on there, and if I don't know about you, I'm a writer, and when people put extensive comments, I have to remind myself, okay, John, doesn't mean they thought they hated it, that they shredded it. It's that they like what they have, and they're just trying to help me give ideas. And that's all those comments are ideas that by all rights, if there's something you don't think is relevant, you can just ignore it. You're not going to hurt my feelings. Because I do think that the bones, the structure is good as where it is. And I did then go on into do what I call go into the nuances. So that's why you see things like coaching charts that we're going to talk about, as well as I ask lots of questions about, from my perspective, is if there is, when a teacher who doesn't have the same background as you looks at that work, what is there to ensure that they do it with the fidelity that you intend? And sometimes, and this is the writer in me, sometimes what we put there is not a complete enough message or story. And that's where you'll see where my comments come in about adding things. So as we dive into each of these sessions, please share your questions as well as your observations. Maybe there's some parties like, you know what? I respectfully disagree, and here's my thought, and I'd like to get your thought, and let's have the conversation, because at the end of the day, it's whatever Citizens Schools decides. I'm just here to give you.
Can I share one thing, John?
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons we thought it might be nice to sort of use this format to dig into some of what we're learning and what we're wondering about was that around the time that this team was starting to build out the remote or the virtual climate science project materials, John and I were saying, how are we going to use this great sort of consultant time that we have through the Dell grant in the most kind of helpful way? And he and I were having a ton of good conversations about what does the virtual format mean, and what are some of the ways that project-based learning can work. And I realized really quickly that I didn't want to just be having the conversation with John through the development of our materials, that building the opportunity for this group to really dig in and discuss some of these questions and challenges about online learning was really going to be most helpful for our whole team to build that skill, and also to support our teachers best as they're sort of getting used to doing some of this project-based learning work in an online way. And as we know, we're going to be doing more of that likely next year too. And so the idea is just for us to have some time together to a path forward in our own learning about that, so that we can be as helpful as possible to our teachers and students. So, for all those reasons, I'm really excited to sort of welcome John, and I hate to interrupt, but I had to just do the little wait, how did we get here moment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, no, please, anytime. And I don't want it to be the talking head that just keeps, talking the whole time. I want you guys to feel empowered to jump into the conversation, because it's going to be this is going to be most beneficial to you if it's a conversation, because just like what Amy was saying, Amy and I have had lots of conversations, so it allows us to personalize. So if you look at the agenda, I just put that into the chat box, and just for purposes of recording, I'm going to share my screen briefly just so that I can show this for our viewers. Let's see, is this it? Yep, this is it. And share, and of course, so this is what we're focusing on. You know, this is our agenda. We're looking at session 1 right now, and then each session will have a different part that's going to be coming up. And but right now we're just in session 1. I know you guys are all in there, so let me just bring back our faces. And so our focus really right now is just looking at project-based learning, looking at that aspect of the work that you do. And so, you know, there's some, so first of all, key things that are in place in every work that I've looked at from you is there's student engagement. That's why I call, there's a level of student agency. And so, you know, think about agency. It's about how do students have the opportunity to take the lead themselves, so it's not just the teacher talking at being the center of the stage and the students are just passively participating. You don't have that in those sessions. And so that's an important piece. It's about having authentic, engaged interactions with experts and guests and who are related to the field. And that's a core part, a signature part of the work that you have there for your students. So then, you know, some of the things I look at that is, okay, how do we elevate that? You know, let me stop there for a moment because,
have a good day.
You know, I introduced myself, Amy introduced me, and I know Amy, I know Lauren, but I don't know Adrian or Stacy. Could you maybe take a moment and just tell me like what kind of work you do and what's your passion about this work?
So yes, I'm Adrian. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Stacy. No, okay. So I'm Adrian. I serve as program manager for Citizen Schools New York. That's where I'm located. And I'm very passionate about this work because just simply I know it works. I think there wasn't really language around learning this way or problem-based or project-based learning this way when I was growing up, but I was one of the students who needed it, and I was able to benefit from it. So that's why I'm really passionate about that, to kind of give that gift back to the students I work with.
Thank you. Stacy?
I'm Stacy. I am program manager and volunteer manager for the North Carolina region. And I am passionate about this work because I used to be an early childhood educator, and I just understand how important your motor skills are to your cognitive skills and how they all work and how you really don't outgrow it. And I think our middle school students could benefit from it.
Wow. All right, great. And you know, and as you share your backgrounds, I realize that we have a connection for both of you from New York and North Carolina, because I grew up in Chicago. And so I was a very big Chicago Bulls fan. So Michael Jordan from North Carolina. And of course, we all know that the best pizza is from Chicago. So, you know, there's some great connections between New York and Chicago there.
I respectfully disagree, John. I respectfully disagree.
You know, it's good to respectfully disagree about the truth, and you know it's all good. It's all good. I mean, there's lots of great things about New York. New York is a wonderful city. It just doesn't have the. It might have the #2 pizza in the world, but you know, that's always a good thing to strive for. All right, so let's go ahead and continue. So great. I really appreciate hearing your perspectives and how you see this. And and so one of the things you'll see in the resources I'm going to use this as a reference piece is it says reference, it says PBL slide. And so this is actually a slide deck that I use when I'm teaching like the first day of project-based learning. And it's not that I expect you to be looking at this entire slide deck. It's rather there's some things I want to highlight from that to just kind of give the rationale for some of the things I see in context with the work that you do. I'm going to think particularly in climate science because that's the one I most recently had been looking at. So let me just bring this up here. Okay. And I'm going to share my screen. All right. Now, I'm going to make this bigger. Can you guys see that pretty well so that I don't have to go just, because that way because I want to just jump around to certain slides. So one of the things that we talked about, when we look at the agenda here, it's this whole idea about public product, interaction with guests and experts, reflection and coaching charge checklists. So I want to look at the first two: public product, interaction with experts and guests, and just kind of a conversation with you, because so you have a public audience, or rather you have interaction with experts, and then your public audience is more of a presentation, which is really is important for kids to do. And so in my comments, what I was trying to talk about is how can we elevate that from the student's perspective. So again, how can we make something that's already very good, how can we make it better? And the idea is this: think about when, as students in class, there's this game called school that they play. And so when we look at PBL, there are two levels, in my opinion, of good project-based learning. There are good projects that are scenario-based, like we're going to do these different things that are authentic or real world. At the end of the day, when we're done, that work is going to stay in the school. Even if we publish it, we're not really going to publish it to, say, an audience who really needs this, but we can see the value in it. And climate science has so much value inherently inside of it. So what this idea here is the idea is that since we're doing that good work, because I think the best scenarios are like one step away from becoming an amazing not just real world, an actual connection to the authentic world that you're creating. So a way to begin that is you look at the outcomes for climate science as an example, and you say, all right, let's expect that all our kids are going to get the concepts. They're going to understand all the scientific concepts. They're going to have, and it's going to help them engage with these experts. At the end of this, how can they contribute or give back to an actual audience? And by the way, sometimes I tend to talk louder on my microphone. So if I'm talking too loud, just tell me, or if I'm talking too quietly. So what this shows you is, okay. Yeah. So one thing you have nailed down in your project is publication. At the end, the students have to share their findings or understandings. What I think it's a little subtle in terms of that could be added is, what if we had an actual target audience beyond the school who could benefit from what your students are going to present about or deliver about, however they're going to do that? Because so here are some levels. How can they either raise awareness, entertain, or sometimes I call it edutain, advocate for a position, or solve a problem? So raising awareness is just like what it says. How can we inform the public about some important issue around climate? So in climate science, they're picking different regions from across the country, or even, I think you have the option of across the world too. They can pick a region and they can learn about it and study it and come up with answers for that region. Well, if that's the case, how could they share that information to that region? What are some avenues, some access, some ways of doing that?
I love this point, John. Just sorry to interrupt, but yeah. I think, one thing that is like both challenging and exciting about thinking about the fall, for example, where we might have more online learning happening, is that I think the rationale or the push to have students work not only be like authentic in like it's an authentic problem that someone who does this would work on, but actually have a real purpose, is I think it's going to feel maybe even more important as students are managing their work
Yes.
more online next year. And so I was so glad you brought this up, because I think this is a place where we really could grow and improve, and where our teachers will have some good ideas about how they would do that locally, like in their school, in their district, that I think we could really learn from.
Yeah, and because you already have in place this process for getting volunteers and experts to be involved, they can potentially be an audience, or they can be a network towards who the audience could be. So even if I pick a region, say in France, that's where I want to do. I want to do Toulouse, France, and I want to look at the climate right there. All right, well, I've got two challenges. One is I don't know anybody in Toulouse and I can't speak French. So what do I do? Well, with some help, it may be, well, what if we're planning, what if our target audience are people who are going to travel to Toulouse, France? And so when they travel, they need to have some understanding about the climate and what to expect. So then that's my audience. Well, if that's my audience, I could make it broadly and just like, if it's just raise awareness, we could publish this as simple as putting on a website or in a Google folder, and then use social media like Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter to tweet out a link to the content to the general public. We could also partner with local travel agents and say, hey, we have this materials. Could you share this as a reference piece for your clients? And so the students would then be interacting with the travel agents in that regard. So, I mean, there's different ways that we can find that. Entertain is like, like the Science Channel, Discovery Channel, the History Channel. They take topics and they craft it in a way that engages people while giving real science information or history. So that's all entertainment means. It's the same thing as raising awareness. It's informing, but informing in an entertaining way that engages people in that direction. Advocacy is about how can we get people in the adult world, so people outside of our school, involved in something, to do something. So that could be, so for example, let's say there's certain climates we're looking at. So here in Michigan, because we had severe rainstorms, we had a whole section that got evacuated because of flooding. So if this was around that time, or you could use that as a reference point and say, you know what, how can we get people who understand this to maybe go to different websites, disaster relief sites, to donate money? Like, we're not going to handle the money. We're just going to say, hey, just understanding about flooding in different regions, if you were to go to, here's 3 different relief agencies that provide support for people who are displaced because of these reasons, we'd like you to pick one of these and donate. And that could be a way to advocate for something. That would be an example of that. Or problem solving. It doesn't mean that the audience sees the problem. Maybe the students see the problem. So going back to this whole thing about flooding, like there's different, like in Louisiana, you have different places where there's flooding every year and people keep going back. And it's like, all right, well, they're going to go back. We're not going to convince them not to go back, but maybe we can put together a toolkit of resources. So a toolkit might be 3 to 5 different sites that give like step-by-step suggestions of how to prepare for such things, with annotations by the students. And then we're going to post that up. We're going to find what agencies already do that kind of work and send that to them. So when the students like send a link with a cover letter to those agencies, what if those agencies don't respond? that's okay, because it's the act of publishing that counts for the kids. So let me stop there for a moment, because like when you pick a direction from these: awareness, entertain, advocacy, problem solving, it helps you identify, helps the teachers identify who their target audience is. And now all the work is done through that lens, and it becomes even more purposeful and real to the kids. What are your thoughts about that?
I agree. How this is layered, I think that this is going to, or this type of lens ups the ante of students not just doing a project that they probably will never visit again in their lives, but actually putting the battery in their back of like, I'm also creating social change by doing this project. I think that's where we need to push our students, and like they can actually be the change agents by doing a simple project for school. So I love this.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Adrian. And I think it's also nice to, I don't know, just like always, just to emphasize for teachers that like it's like wherever you and your students are is okay and important, you know. And if students are working on building awareness and they're not like at the point yet where they're ready to bite off like problem solving, like the teacher is like just starting with problem, like project-based learning, and they're feeling overwhelmed by that, like, you know, like kind of just naming the levels and being like, yeah, that's great. If you work on building awareness to this, that's excellent. And just kind of, I don't know, just helping teachers to be okay with the journey and to not kind of see it as a like, well, I didn't get to here, so I failed. Like helping them to see it in terms of like, great, I am building in this into my practice.
That's been on my mind too, Lauren. I think I don't remember exactly where the story came from, but there was one example of like project-based learning is only good if the mayor calls us back and puts us on TV, right? So like there's this sort of misconception of like, if students are not like seeing that change happen in the 6 weeks that they're doing the project, that it's unsuccessful. And I think part of what we're working toward is like Lauren said, making it okay to be at the level that they are in their journey to do more and better and stronger project-based learning, but also that there's like value even in a smaller sort of footprint of their impact, but that's still going to sort of get the meaning and the engagement and sort of maybe even be more likely to keep teachers and students like on the journey of getting better with project-based learning, because they're not like swinging for the fences on the first try and getting really frustrated or, you know, getting overwhelmed by how much like hard work it is to or like how disappointing it can be if you have this very grand project and then you don't get the response that you set your heart on. So I have it in mind too, and sort of thinking about what are the audiences that kind of give that same sort of feedback and like helpfulness without being so grand that, you know, they're not going to call us back or they're not going to respond to students' ideas respectfully or something.
Mm-hmm. And I think also that like teachers can, I don't know, kind of differentiate, you know, like that. And I think we always find this, right? That we always have teachers who just are incredible and really get it. And so I think like it helps us to kind of differentiate and be like, oh, okay, like you're in your first year of doing this, but you're totally getting it. So here's how I, as a coach, can kind of push you even further. Like, okay, great. How can your students like be engaging in advocacy or problem solving? Like, so I think it's nice for us to kind of like hold both in our heads, because I'm constantly amazed by what our teachers are able to do, even when this is like technically new. It's like they've just got it in their bones and just do it with such ease and skill.
Yeah, so I want to capture two threads of themes of the conversation that you guys just contribute to this. One has to do with purpose. As Adrian talked about, the idea that, you know, social change and And that's something in kids, well, someone say students, because, kids that you have all ages. I know you're looking, I think most be second middle school. But, kids are all about what's fair. Fairness is a big piece in their life and what they do. And when you get to middle school and high school, in both those arenas, social change becomes much more, they're very much aware of that, the idea of what's fair socially. And so connecting to that can be very powerful. I mean, and what we're doing is we're giving them a voice. And in some schools, not all your schools, but in some schools, students tend to have the misconception that their voice doesn't matter in the world outside of school. And so going in this direction can really help them see that their voice does matter. People are listening. So now you combine that with the other piece that you guys were talking about, which was about publication. Like you talk about, well, oftentimes there's this feeling of, oh, it's got to be grand, it's got to be huge and big, otherwise, why are we doing this? And, some of the best projects that I've seen were just really had simple outcomes. For example, there's a school in Nashville, Tennessee. It was a middle school, and as I was working with the teachers, they were coming up with a project, and ultimately the project that they designed for themselves was one about raising awareness about cancer. And their whole driving question for the project was, how can we find a cure for cancer? Which was like, wow, and when they thought about their audience, the audience that they eventually landed on was they had a local hospital that had a children's cancer ward. And so they wanted to raise awareness on behalf of them. And actually, they ended up doing advocacy because they wanted to get people to eventually just raise funds to donate to the Cancer Society on behalf of the hospital, the Children's Cancer Ward. One of their students, this was a fifth grade classes. One of their students was a fifth grader who at the time was a 2-time cancer survivor. And so they did all this work around cancer, and it was part of their curriculum around cells. That's where it came from, because cancer was not part of the curriculum. But if kids understood biology and the cell structures in animal cells, plant cells, things like that, then they could also then distinguish that between cells that are not healthy. And that's where they brought that in. And at the end, they said they decided to do a potluck. So it was an open potluck, inviting parents and community to come. And the kids had their they set up these stands, like those science fair type of setups where kids were going to talk about either the social, economic, or scientific impact of cancer. And the idea was by talking about that they would get the community really motivated to donate money, and they had like a donation box that sat at the table, and they didn't do any type of sales job about the box. They just said there's a box, and the food was free, and so they decided also to say, let's invite the local news agency to come in, the TV news to come and just do some interviews. So they came down, they did that. So two things happened. One is because the school happened to be in a neighborhood that had high poverty, and yet their community raised $1,000 from that event, just from there. I mean, people just put what they wanted to do. The second thing is that the local news they did a segment on this, and I mean they posted it. And then ASCD, someone from there saw the video, and it just went national. It was like the viral conversation for at least a week about what these kids did. And if you talk to the teachers when they planned this, they would say to you, all we planned was we wanted kids to convince their local community to help fight cancer. That's all they're trying to do. And so we're gonna have a potluck, and we're gonna have the kids talk about it, and maybe we'll raise some money. That's all their focus was. So when you're working with the teachers, that's really what's important for them. And maybe that's a piece that might be needed, like a little like mini toolbox. I'm just thinking for, is to create like a 1 to 3 pager, like I would envision, that gives teachers an understanding of different levels of what publication could look like for kids, that is okay. What are you guys' thoughts about that?
Agreed. I think it'd be super helpful. Be a great resource.
Yeah, I like that. I like what you're sort of describing as like the sort of like target was an awareness project, and then relatively easily, just based on kind of where the energy was or like who showed up, it sort of turned into a deeper advocacy or, you know, excitement building as opportunities kind of presented themselves. And so I like that it wasn't necessarily the teacher saying like, we're going to solve cancer. That's our goal, but our goal is the awareness building. And then we will see where we can take it from there as we get deeper into the work. I feel like that approach would resonate pretty well with the way our program is kind of like set up in like over time. Like a volunteer STEM expert could be really helpful in sort of taking that awareness and like extending it in ways that are sort of emergent, you know, and available to the class.
Yeah. So I'm gonna pivot a little bit and look at this whole idea about public product and student you know, agency of work, and take a deeper dive in this whole idea about roles and authentic roles. And so I realized I did include these articles, and I can share those with you. I'll try to post this in the moment before the recording, so it's over, so I'll have it. I mean, they're linked down to this website here. But so when we think about what makes the difference between what I would say okay PBL and good PBL is having a clear, authentic connection. Whereas, you know, there's this where students can see how what they're learning, the content they're learning, in context to some authentic connection beyond the school. Okay, you already have that. Those are things you already put in place. So then, what can make it even better is how can we turn a scenario into something that's actual, where students are going to contribute in some way. So we looked at this. This is the first step. This is what helps teachers think about, well, who's our audience going to be? Because they want to do that first before they decide on the product. This is about the experiential side. So what this is about is level 1, authentic. So foundational, anytime we do something authentic in PBL or outside of PBL, it's got to be aligned with the content, the curriculum, because it helps kids, our students, to understand the contextual connections of curriculum to application. That's what makes it purposeful. So then level 1 is how do we help students understand those connections? So one way of looking at this is that we are giving examples, like we're saying, yeah, in the field of biology, this is how this works with cells or in cancer. Or since let's look climate science, you know, meteorologists and other people in the field, this is how within that scientific community, this is how they use that. And I think you probably already have that in place with your volunteers. You know, that's happening. So here's the nuance to that is, okay, we've got the volunteers. What we want to do, and maybe you already do this, I just don't see the language in the document, and it's a real easy piece to put in, is we want the students, when they come to this class, they are scientists. They're not students learning about science, talking to experts about science. They are scientists, and when the volunteers come in, these are their colleagues who they're engaging with and having constructive dialogue, because really at the end of the day, the way your projects are structured, the students have to design something. I mean, you have engineering design is an important component of the work that your kids are doing. So they're the designers, And they are using these experts and these guests as sounding boards, as mentors, to create this collaborative idea. So if we have students from the get-go, they see themselves as already in the profession, because that's what they're practicing, it just elevates this level 1. Because now they see themselves as part of that. So now when guests come in, it's not just a sit and listen, it's a discussion. And sometimes it's an interrogation by the students, or it's a critique session where the students are sharing their designs, their prototypes, and they're getting feedback so they can go back and do some polish before they move forward. And then level 2 is just about, what we just talked about with this piece right here. So by doing that, then this level 2 becomes more powerful, because now I'm not just in the profession practicing what it's like, I'm in the profession doing work that's going to impact a need. And I always say community, and I use that as a generic term. Community can be local, it could be in North Carolina, it could be in New York City, or it could be more broader. Or rather, I say New York City. I mean, New York City is almost like a country in itself. It could be a borough in New York City. It could just focus in that area, or it's someplace like in Raleigh, Durham, or it's in Oklahoma, or it's in Chicago, wherever that piece is. We can pick this as our focal point. So when we do this, level 2 is about, okay, we're experts in the field, and level 2 is we're now having collegial conversations with our volunteer colleagues that are helping us elevate this work, and then level 3 is, and by doing this work, we are addressing a need. It's either a need that everyone knows is already present, or it can be a need that the students see that the adults don't. And that's okay. The adults say, well, that's not a problem. Well, if the students see it's a problem, then, we've seen students who are in the community coming up with ideas that the adults would have said was impossible, and they come up with a solution because they don't have the baggage that adults we have around politics and social awareness that kind of holds us back. It doesn't hold them back. So this is the other component when it comes to authenticity, is how we help teachers navigate these 3 levels, so that if they just do level 2, it's a really good scenario. Level 3 makes it builds those components of what makes it real during the experience. So what are your thoughts about this? And maybe even, let's first take a moment. Let's take like 30 seconds of silent reflection. I want you to think about climate science or in the Kinetic project, and think about what are some connections you see here about, either this is there, or we could elevate this part just by doing this. So 30 seconds of silent reflection begins now. Okay, when you're ready, please share your thoughts.
I think one of the things that I was thinking about was kind of thinking about this in the context of some of the work we've been doing around exploring what coaching a teacher over the course of several years looks like. And so I think that this could be, could work nicely with that of, that as teachers continue their engagement with Catalyst and with these units, that they are like working toward some of this, that, you know, that maybe in year 2, you know, I think that we always in our units go beyond just students listening to experts from the field, and, you know, having volunteers kind of working side by side with students as students are doing project work. So I think we do a really nice job of that, kind of having that baseline of students engaging in collegial conversations with experts from the field. And then I think that as teachers start engaging with us over time, they could be working toward, like, how can I as a teacher be preparing and supporting my students to address, like, an authentic need in a community or for a client. And so that can be sort of like a, you know, I could see that as a clear kind of coaching focus in year 2 or year 3 of a teacher's engagement. Of like, okay, good, you've got the students working with volunteers, you've got the, you know, in year 2, they're really working to make sure that those engagements are really effective and really supporting students well. And then year 3, you know, they could be really focused on that. And of course, like, it could be like year 1 or year 2 when teachers are ready. But I think, like, just like thinking about that as like part of a teacher's journey could be helpful.
I love that, Lauren. And I think this is really pushing me to think about one of my assumptions, which is that, like, the scenario version, sort of that level 2, is what we can build pre-written curricula for, or like project plans that are pre-built. Like, I think I sometimes have a mindset of, like, you can only get that far in our sort of pre-built projects. And what I love about what you're sharing is then there's sort of this, like, focus on the pre-written projects will sort of be a starting point of some sort. And then what is the coaching work and the set of questions that our coaches and our program managers will ask teachers and sort of engage with teachers around, so that then they're able to really flesh out that kind of level 3 for themselves, or maybe at the school level, like, what does a level 3 project look like over time? And I think you're right. Doing that in, like, the second go around, to me, feels like supportive and scaffolded and, like, helpful in the right ways. And I was thinking a lot about how the collaboration skills and structures that we build in a level 2 kind of project then support students to be ready and excited and prepared well for, like, that maybe less, like, predictable level 3 project. And that framing is really exciting to me, because it sort of cracks open this, like, we can only get so far mindset that I've had.
Yeah, it feels like a nice connection between, like, curriculum and the coaching that PMs do. I don't know, what do you think, Adrienne?
I was sitting over here being the amen corner when John was speaking anyway. There was just so many things. I was like, yes, John, you're hitting it. And I just share a similar scope of one of the things that you really said that really got me fired up was just shifting the psyche of students before the work is even done. I think is, like, the most important thing, of saying you're not just students now, you are the biologists about to step into your lab coats to to take ownership of your work. And I think that's just super important for the students that I have previously worked with, and then the work that I see in the teachers. Students are just like, this is pen and paper, this is something that I'm supposed to do, but having them take ownership of their own learning is detrimental to what we're trying to do. And then just thinking about the climate science unit as a whole, with that being said, like, students aren't just robots, they have stories, they have experiences that they're coming into the classroom with every single day. And just giving them the autonomy to choose the communities that they want to tackle. A lot of my students are from different countries. A lot of my students are Caribbean. A lot of my students are Southeast Asian and things of that sort. So having them be able to choose the communities that resonate with them on more of a personal level, I think could really be impactful as well. So shout out to you, John, because you're speaking nothing but facts.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Um, one of the things, I'll add a direct link to this here in our agenda. And so what you'll have here are the two articles that go into more detail of that. They're both articles I wrote for Edutopia that can be, that go into those pieces. And they're the first two ones that are there. In fact, just so I'll get that taken care of. But yeah, so it's, and and these ideas I'm sharing with you, these are not just theoreticals. I mean, this is what I did as a classroom teacher. This is what I've seen in different classrooms, where seeing how the kids respond. So where, for example, one class in biology, we're getting ready to do presentations, parent presentations, and the teacher wanted them to practice. And so what she said to them was, our colleagues scientists have symposiums where they share their papers. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have our symposium right now, and we're going to use that protocol. And they did. They went up. They gave their talk, and it was a practice session. The teacher could have said, "All right, class, we're going to practice." You can imagine how that would have flown. I've seen even kindergartners who were responsible for they were making a farmer's market, and they're partnering with first graders, and so they were growing vegetables and they were sorting vegetables. If you talk to them, they referred to themselves as gardeners, and they had a couple master gardeners working with them, and that's how, and they saw themselves as getting ready to share with their community healthy eating. So language, words have power. And so those are things that we can do. Connected to the public product. So that public product can, like I said, can be as simple as just posting or making announcements. It could also be recordings. Not everything has to be written. I mean, if we want students, if writing is an important component, maybe before their presentation or the recording, they're writing an outline, and then they get to practice that. So lots of ways that we can get at this. And one last thing about publication is, in, say, the adult world, when you send a proposal to another organization, there is no guarantee they're going to respond. So we have to be clear about that to our students, as you guys have said before.
Adrian's like, yeah, I know, I sent a lot of emails. It's so true. It's so true.
Yeah. So we got to help teachers understand that success is not getting a response. Success is knowing we did quality work and we sent it to an audience, and the kids know, hey, hopefully we're going to get a response. If we don't get a response, it still counts as publication. Now, you've got volunteers, and there's ways of kind of help support that response, but that is not the determining factor of success. All right, cool. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, and we're going to go, hold on, let me also put in the agenda, the link to that page with the articles I just shared with you. I'm going to put that under references. So it's now there. So before, we've been talking a lot about public product and interaction with experts and guests. And so before we move on to the other components, are there any questions or observations or just thoughts about that we haven't, that you have your perspective based upon the work you're doing that you'd like to raise or explored? Or based on those two topics, public product and authentic, audience with experts and guests.
This is like just sort of a thought, but I've been thinking a lot about our volunteer-facing materials and how I think we do some work around like this piece around like the language and the power of words and the power of like helping students take on a role and sort of the ways of knowing and thinking in that discipline. And I'm also like, we should be doing that a lot more and modeling that a lot for volunteers, like when we're in classrooms, and what are some of the ways that we can just continue to support volunteers to feel empowered to do that more, from whatever their disciplines are. And it's just sort of an excitement, I guess, to say like, all of this is bringing up for me that helping volunteers get over any sort of like shyness or awkwardness they might have about really sort of like welcoming students into the fold of their career and their interests. Because I also think that's kind of why volunteers are there, but don't necessarily feel okay about doing that. They feel sort of, I don't know. Some of them do that so well. And when I think about some of our strongest volunteers, they do that in like big and small ways. And so I'm thinking about, how we just make that part of how we do our projects, kind of baked into the fabric of Catalyst. And it's just like a really exciting like little moment that I'm having around like, how can we continue to show examples of that and lift that up for other volunteers who might be new to the program, and emphasize that when we are observing or when we're talking with our volunteers, and obviously when we're doing professional development with the volunteers, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think you have some of this already in your structure, and maybe just build off of it in terms of support guides for volunteers, of how do we interact, like how do you want them to interact, and that could be as well as part of teacher preparation, like when they're going to have a guest come in, we say, well, I want you to go and talk to the kids, and I want you to give them kids feedback about their work. Well, you need to give the volunteers some more guidance than that, very, very concretely, like here's some starter stems, here's the kind of feedback we want. It's like, for example, a phrase that I learned from a couple of places. One was ASCD, was feedback should be specific, constructive, and kind. And it should have all those components. And so people in their best intentions are going, without guidance, are going to engage in that in the way that they normally do that. And they may not be specific. They may be very specific and direct, but not use a good word choice to show kindness. So having those type of things, having even sample, I don't want to call them rubrics, I'm going to say feedback guides that are meant for volunteers who are not educators. And probably simple is best to begin with, so that they just know this is what's expected. Even down the road, having students have teachers record students, basically doing a video guide for volunteers. When you come to us, this is what we'd like you to do. This is what we need from you. And hearing it from the students' voices, and we'll both put the adults at ease and raise the weight of how important this is.
I love that. And one of my favorite videos that I captured, we do some of that, John. We haven't dug into much of that with you, but I don't think it goes far enough into the kind of like welcoming students as colleagues kind of way of thinking as we could. One of my favorite videos was from this fall in Wilma's class. We asked students what they loved about Teddy coming to their class, and the students actually said, like, we love that he explained stuff more than once in words that we could understand, and that he treated us like we were becoming scientists or something like that. And it was just like, it captured that so like well. I'm obsessed with it, and I'm thinking about like Adrian, we're gonna thank you so much for making time this morning. We're gonna think together about what a follow-on session might be, kind of based on some of these resources and where we want to go next. So we definitely have more time with John, and would love to talk with you about how we can use that time that we have in a way that's most helpful. Awesome, thank you.
John, you're a rock star. Keep doing what you're doing. I love your mindset. We're so aligned. I gotta go, but I really want to continue this conversation for sure.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye.
And I just realized I need to put my contact info into the agenda so that as people have questions later on, they can
Great.
do that. So I'm doing that right now. Okay.
I think
Wow.
oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I think one of the things that, as I put myself into the mindset of like a teacher and a volunteer coach, like our PMs are, I think one of the things that I struggle a little bit, like if you're working toward a public present, an authentic publication of student work, I think this note that you have around like the definition of success is doing quality work. And I think that is so important, right? Like if we're trying to put sharing something out with, like public health officials or, like putting things on websites, like it has to be quality, right? Like it has to, and if like it has to resemble the work that is done in the real world, not only in terms of like methods, but also in terms of like that level of quality. And that takes a lot of time and work. And I think sometimes what's hard to coach around is like the extent to which it's like finding that balance between like both from a teacher perspective and a volunteer perspective, that balance between like encouraging where students are on their journey and like how they're growing and how they're improving and like over time, while also like, I don't know, just like pushing them to go further in quality. And like when, I don't know, because it's like, I think that it's easy for volunteers and teachers to go too far. Well, maybe especially for volunteers, right? Like teachers are pretty good at this, but like for volunteers, I think they can get caught between like finding that right balance between like not just like going way over students' heads and they're like, well, I don't know how to do a linear equation. I'm 12. So like, and versus like, oh, that's cute. You tried. Like, yeah, good job. You did it. Even if it's like not anywhere near what a professional would do. And like, just also like trying to keep in mind that like, you wouldn't expect somebody who is 12 to produce something that looks exactly like what somebody who is like a PhD student who's been like in this for like 15 years like would do. So like, it's like both like finding that balance of like pushing for quality while also like understanding like what does exceptional work and quality look like at a middle school level when this is maybe like the first time they've studied climate science. So that's kind of a rambling thing. But
No, you raised a really important area is, it should be at what we consider, strong quality at a middle school level with middle school students. And I mean, there is, and that can be translatable or transferable to what is published. So part of that is being clear in criteria. Part of it is saying we're not going to, this is a mistake sometimes people make, is we're not going to say we're only going to send the top 4. Because as soon as you say that, then you're going to have groups of people who check out because they're like, oh, I can't compete. There's no way. And it lets me off the hook. Instead, you can say, here's the criteria for quality, which we just expect if you're going to demonstrate mastery or learning. If everyone who meets the minimum levels of quality are going to get published. Doesn't matter how many it's going to be. So if someone doesn't do their work appropriately, so it's not of quality, then it's for that reason that they don't get published in that regard. It's not because they didn't do that. Now, the other part, I thought you were going to go this direction, and you didn't, so I'm going to go there, is sometimes the challenge is giving time to prepare to develop that quality product. So we're going to do the presentation. We're going to have our prototype. And, really we should be giving you, 2 hours to do this. We're going to give you 15 minutes. Go. Well, okay.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges we face in just the jam-packed sort of scope of the year is like.
Yeah. So one way to, and I don't necessarily, I'm going to give you a solution, but I'm going to just raise an observation. And that is, it is through the work, the time where students are actually crafting, that they are practicing the skills to develop mastery and then demonstrating what they know and they don't know. If we don't give them respectful amount of time, which can be chunked, to do that, then we're not going to get to the quality. And students are not necessarily going to remember the learning. They'll remember the experience, but don't remember all the learning. And I would say, so one and I know that with the curriculum, it's really challenging. And so one suggestion I would have is, how can we, if we need, for example, I'm just going to throw this number out randomly. If we need 2 hours of work time for the students, which we cannot do, because you can't just give 2 days, and I don't think that would be productive in itself. But how can we drop in 15 to 20 minutes across different lessons where students are given time to ideate and prototype and get feedback and produce? And then at that point, what is the best way to do a quality presentation within the time we have for prep? If we don't have time to really prep a live presentation, then let's do recordings. Because I guarantee you there'll be a lot of kids who'll take the next 15, 20 minutes to record 3 or 4 times their presentations over and over again until it sounds right. And then that's what gets posted. So it may not be a me live talking, although it could be me live introducing my video. The video happens, and now I take questions. And now that might be a way to address, challenges of time, as opposed to saying, okay, week 9, you've gotten your product done. Week 10, you're going to do your presentations. Well, where do we practice? And realistically, how do we get enough time to do that? Well, a recording or something else then at that point might be the better option.
Yeah, John, we should probably wrap in a few minutes here and just sort of spend some time offline talking about some next steps. But sure. I am thinking a lot, your question, Lauren, about what's that standard for publishing and how do we have conversations about that maybe even include a volunteer's perspective in coaching is really interesting to me. I think, sometimes I feel like my answer is it doesn't matter that much if it's quality, and what's the other conversation about how the process is deepening thinking. But I think that step of having a final product that students take pride in and can have a conversation about is so important. And right now, so often we're not in our projects, we're not able to quite get there, I think, because of the overly ambitious bite that we're taking off. And so I think one of the things I'm interested in talking more about is what's the right combination of volunteer and teacher feedback on the sort of process and the skills students are working on along the way, and then what's the right feedback on the final product to actually have enough time to at least revise before some sort of published moment. And maybe we just say the best we can do is one set of revisions, and that's at least going to get them a little further in meeting the standard or meeting the publishable expectations. But I think this is a really good conversation to talk about in the context of online learning too. So because it's what are the alternative ways of sharing, and what's the moment that we would actually put that out into the world.
Yep. Well, and we certainly have this to make me think. Okay, we'll go grab it in just a second. I think we certainly have the performance task sort of criteria, for our full unit, and then the like sort of like rubrics and checklists for the virtual remote learning in the student guides, and even just like supporting teachers and volunteers to look at those together, I think could just be an effective like part of their collaboration. Like if they just started there and being like, okay, like this is what
I
we're
love that.
looking for, then I think both like that gives volunteers a window in to what, and gives them an opportunity to ask the teacher like, okay, but what does that look like at a middle school level? And I think also prompts opportunities for a volunteer to be like, oh, well, you know, at my work, we do that through a blah, 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 blah. And like, then they can kind of build that in and sort of like have it better mirror like
Yeah.
workplace setting. So that would be a good starting point.
And then maybe there's something like over time, or maybe like a year two teacher, there's some sort of practice around as volunteers are coming in for those later sessions, they're actually sort of reviewing some set of like themes or patterns in that formative assessment kind of work, so that then they're going around and they're like, I can't do everything with every group, but like 4 out of 5 groups need, you know, more clarity in their writing up their brochure. And so like that creates a really nice responsive like volunteer set of actions that I think we have all those things laid out in our volunteer guides, but we're not telling them as volunteers like when they might do which things, in what scenarios they might engage in those ways. And I think there's like a lot of good potential there for like you said, like planning together, or even just like more informal conversations between the teacher and volunteer around that. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to say that we had 2 items on our list that we really didn't get to. And so what I'll do is I'll move those up, down to the next meeting, and we'll focus first on our core focus for next meeting, which is the virtual. And if we can incorporate those 2 items, we will.
Okay.
So, and I'll just rely on your direction as far as if we jump on those items sooner than later, as far as the coaching charts and the checklists and protocols.
Yeah, and I think, Lauren, it might be helpful for you and I to talk a little bit with the group about the right timing for the next session and how it fits in with some like the upcoming projects. I want to make sure that we're sort of getting some of this thoughtful time in at both kind of like before or as we're launching the June projects, but I also know that folks have a lot to sort of do to get ready. So it's a balance there, but
Yeah.
maybe get some input from the team as we're thinking about the right timeline for those sessions.
Great. Awesome.
Cool. All right. John,
Great.
Thank you so much. This was fun.
John.
Yeah, thank you. I'll get this up on YouTube as a private link, and then I'll share the link.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.